permaculture in the first two sessions that we did. And Carmen took you guys through some basic gardening things. And so I thought that we kind of close out this live stream session we've been on over the last 2 weeks, talking about some case studies so you guys can see real life examples of what permaculture looks like. So these are renderings of past properties that we've worked on. Um, and I'm going to actually bring up a few other images as well. I'm going to probably go through past cooler greenhouse examples. You guys can see some different examples of integrated design. I think that's the piece that I want to focus on today. Um, a lot of times, permaculture uh, kind of gets pigeonholed into just growing food or gardening, and it does represent an important part of what permaculture is about. Gardening is kind of an interesting metaphor for taking care of our own needs, because food is one of the biggest things that we need on a daily basis. Um, when we were traveling around the world trying to figure out what we wanted to do when we grew up, we ended up in Denmark learning about renewable energy because we were oil and gas engineers, and volume is really low. Okay, thanks guys. I will try and fix that here. Let me just, here we go. How is that? You guys hear me now? I will, I think I just had to change the microphone here, so hopefully, uh, just diagnosing. It takes a few seconds for the stream to catch up here, so hopefully, small sounds, full of volume. Okay, that's not good. We will see if we can fix that there. You guys give me a sound check now? Check, check, check 1, 2. Just checking to see the quality of my sound. Here we go. Oh, I think I figured it out. How's that? Test, test, test 1, 2. That should be better. Okay. Hopefully that is coming in a bit stronger now. I just changed the microphone setting again, and it should be coming through a bit stronger on, at least it seems like. No worries, Cassie. All right, I think the audio issues are fixed there. I'm going to assume that they are. Perfect. Okay, so I was just talking a little bit about how when we first left the oil and gas industry and traveled the world, we ended up in this institute in Denmark called the Folk Center for Renewable Energy. And the Folk Center was specifically set up to transition or help to become a transitional force in the energy industry. And we started to learn about how the world was, specifically how Denmark was going to move to 100% renewables, and which was really great for both Michelle and I, because we had come from the oil and gas industry where everybody was talking about how it wasn't possible. And the more we studied there, the more we realized it was possible. And in fact, I just saw an article this morning that we are now in the era of cheap wind and cheap energy. And so the transition to renewable energy is well underway. It's not good for Alberta, which is where we're from, but it is good for the rest of the world. And so as we learned about how disruptive solar and wind actually was, we also found out that the food system was one of the big problems in the world. And that's kind of why we went down the permaculture path. And so we kind of learned as much as we could about agriculture and permaculture traveling the world. But at the end of all of those travels, what we realized is that we couldn't just focus on food and we couldn't just focus on energy, but we actually had to focus on the integration of all of these elements. And that's what I wanted to talk about this evening, is how these components integrate together. And so I thought I'd go through a few case studies for you guys. And I'm going to go through, I think, 3 properties. Let me just see here. Yeah, I've got 3 different properties in 3 different bioregions. So Alberta, Ontario, 2 in Alberta and 1 in Ontario. And there's more there if we want to
you know, go through more case studies so we can see how it goes here. I'm just going to check to see what the chat is looking like here. Yeah, so no questions as of right now. Vita, I saw that you joined the PDC. I'm super stoked to have you in the class. I've been waiting to have you as a student, and I'm absolutely thrilled. And Dan Teffler is in the class as well, and I noticed that he signed in today. So I know you're going to get a lot of value out of the PDC. So thank you for taking that leap. That's great. So I'm going to share my screen, and Cassie, I'm going to be speaking with Cassie tonight. She's a former PDC student. She gets a custom one-on-one review of her project this evening because she's been helping us to test out a brand new app that we just released on contourmapgenerator.com. I'll put the link up there for you guys. We're really excited about this. I'm not really supposed to be telling anybody about the soft launch, but for folks in the United States, especially, this map is a complete game changer for permaculture design. So you may want to check that out. Anyhow, so I wanted to start with, let's see here. Let's start with a greenhouse design. I think that this kind of gives a sense of this idea of integrated design, and then we can kind of fractal out into a full property design and talk about all the different components. And this greenhouse actually represents a portion of the, this greenhouse is embedded in one of the properties that we're going to talk about. So let's take a peek at this greenhouse. I'll share my screen here. Just give me 2 seconds to get this sorted out. I should close some programs down here so I don't end up freezing my computer. Let me just do that first. Yeah, integrated design is the thing that I should have learned about in engineering, but that never really got taught. And there's this one lesson, and I gave it in the first intro session that I gave live on YouTube last week on a needs and yields exercise. And the idea of needs and yields is that every element in a system has intrinsic needs and it has intrinsic yields. And when we don't meet the needs of a system from within the system, we pay the price in energy and pollution. So for example, when you build a greenhouse and you don't figure out how to build the greenhouse so that it heats itself, we have to bring in electricity or natural gas to heat the greenhouse. Versus if you can design the greenhouse and understand how to integrate it into the landscape and build the right components into the greenhouse, then you don't have to import materials in order to make the greenhouse work more effectively. And so you can change the word greenhouse with chicken, cow, passive solar house, solar photovoltaic system, rainwater harvesting, food forest. It doesn't really matter what element it is that you're talking about. Our goal in permaculture is to try and create closed loop cycles. And so the way that we do that is that we try and identify a system, we draw a boundary around that system, and then we try and understand all the intrinsic needs and yields of that system and find matches for them. And so I'm going to show how we can do that with something like a greenhouse. Typically in permaculture, when we talk about needs and yields, we talk about biological systems like chickens. And that's a great example because a lot of what we do has to do with biological systems. But we can do this with things that are less biological, basically like fixed elements like greenhouses. So let me share my screen here and go through this with you guys. So this is a greenhouse that we designed for a client several years ago. This is still not this still has not been constructed. Part of it has been constructed. There's a version of this in Calgary, just the front end. The back end hasn't been built yet. But it will at some point. It's just a matter of timing. And so I wanted to show this greenhouse. I'm going to show you a few different photos from it. This one's a nice one to kind of take a peek at because it kind of illustrates the overall shape of the actual greenhouse itself. And so this has a passive solar greenhouse on the front. And so a passive solar greenhouse is a greenhouse that's insulated on the east, north, and west sides. And I actually pointed to the wrong surfaces as I said that. So the west, north, and east sides, and has glazing on the south side. And so it's designed for climates that have a lot of sun through the winter and through the summer, but generally are colder through the winter, fall, and spring months, versus a climate that has a lot of cloud but is more temperate, like Holland. That climate would be more beneficial to have a greenhouse like a glass house. And so, like a typical greenhouse that you would expect to find, like when I say the word greenhouse, most people are going to think about a greenhouse that has glass on all 6 aspects. A passive solar greenhouse only has glazing on 1 aspect, and that's typically the south aspect. So greenhouses produce a lot of surplus thermal energy, and they, especially even in the wintertime, they can get very, very warm, and so they need to have lots of ventilation. They tend to be high humidity spaces. And they're also, one of the things that they produce is food if they're designed properly. And so we wanted to build a greenhouse that understood these intrinsic needs and yields of all the different elements in a specific greenhouse. And the clients also wanted to have a relaxation space inside, specifically a wood-fired hot tub. They wanted a little deck to sunbathe on. They wanted to grow food. And then they wanted to be able to take that food and can it in a canning kitchen or a food preservation kitchen. And then when they were done with that, move that preserved food into a root cellar. And so we combined a greenhouse, a kitchen, and a root cellar all in one. Now, it turns out that all 3 of these elements work very well together if they're oriented in the right location. And so I'm going to take you to a cross-section of this greenhouse, and then I'll come back and explain what these pipes are and why we laid this greenhouse out the way that we did. So just give me 2 seconds here, and I will wonder if it'll let me. Nope. Just going to stop my screen share. Okay, so here's another cross-section coming right up. So here's a cross section, and you can't really see too much of the kitchen and too much of the root cellar yet, but I'll get to that in a second. So here's the greenhouse on the front. We've got the hot tub right there. We've got the subterranean heating and cooling system. We just did a whole bunch of research on these subterranean heating and cooling systems, actually. A lot of students have wanted to design them, and so I've shown them how to do it, but I was never certain about how effective they were. We had some anecdotal evidence that they were working, but I couldn't tell people exactly how efficient they actually were. And so we built our own greenhouse this year. And before we put the money into a subterranean heating and cooling system, what we did, I just saw your question, JJ711, I'll get to it in 2 seconds there. Before we got to the construction of the subterranean heating and cooling system, we wanted to do a thermodynamic model to confirm whether or not it actually worked. So I'll keep going with that. JJ711 asks, what software do you use for doing this? So this is a software called Lumion, and I actually have several people that help me with that. There are several different rendering programs that you can get, and so it's going to depend on what you start drawing it with. Lumion's quite nice because you start off with Revit or AutoCAD, and then you can bring that drafting model into Revit, and then from there, Lumion will basically take the framework of it and start to kind of build the shape. I'm definitely not an expert in Revit, but if you are interested in someone helping you out with that sort of stuff, I can definitely put you in touch with the right person if you get in touch with us. So hopefully that answered the, how do you spell it? I'll just put it up into the chat here for you. So that's Lumion. So first you start with something like Revit. You don't have to. Lumion is kind of program non-dogmatic in that you can start with several different drafting softwares first. And I believe you can draw right inside of Lumion as well. but yeah, just get in touch with us, and I'll put you in touch with a gentleman here in Calgary that helps me out with. Yeah, Revit is an AutoCAD product. It's a drafting software, and it allows you to draw in 3D. Another really great option is SketchUp. You can start with SketchUp, which is kind of got a free version, but you really have to get the paid version, and it does very kind of rudimentary 3-dimensional renderings. But then you can get plugins for SketchUp, and this is probably a little bit more approachable than Lumion. And I will have to look up the name of that, but you can get plugins for SketchUp, and then it'll photo render to produce photos kind of like this. So anyways, I, for a long time, was very interested in these subterranean heating and cooling systems. And so how they work is the greenhouse gets hot. You get tons of thermal energy up in the top here. And so it has a yield of thermal energy, except that usually when it's extra hot, it doesn't need all of that extra thermal energy. And so you end up with these vents that basically allow air to move through the greenhouse. And so we set this up so that a fan turns on, sucks the hot air down, pushes it underground, and then blows it back into the greenhouse. Now, the air up here is hot and humid. And so as it moves through the ground and cools down, the air actually loses some of the humidity. And so when you condense water out of air, you end up dropping energy into the soil. And so the air dehydrates and it cools down. And so that's why it's called a subterranean heating and cooling system. Now, in the wintertime, when the air is really cold and these plants are stressed out, this system can also turn back on again, and it sucks air, the cold air out of the ground, out of the air, and it's cold and dry now because when you cool air down, it dries out. And it brings the cool, dry air underground. And because the soil is warm and moist, the cool, dry air will actually evaporate water off the soil, which cools the soil down, but warms up the air, rehumidifies the air, warms it back up again, and keeps the greenhouse hot. And so we have a set point to turn the fan on when the temperature in the greenhouse gets too cold. And we have a set point that turns the fan on when the greenhouse gets too hot. And so the earth becomes a giant thermal mass battery that basically regulates the temperature inside of the greenhouse. So coming back to this concept of needs and yields, the greenhouse yields surplus energy. The subterranean heating and cooling system stores surplus energy. And when the greenhouse has a lack of energy, like in the middle of the winter, that same heat storage mechanism releases that energy back into the greenhouse. So anecdotally, we knew that it worked, but we didn't have 100% confirmation that it worked. And so I wanted to produce a thermodynamic model. So we spent most of the summer producing this model, and we found some amazing things out of it. And in fact, we're going to be releasing a white paper later this year that we're in the middle of writing right now, and we're going to give it all away. We're going to give away all of our findings. Because what we want is we want to create a community of people that can help to add to the results and learn so that we can speed up the process of development. And so you can keep an eye out on our website for that white paper. We'll probably do a YouTube video on it when it's ready to go out. But we tested things like what would happen if the pipes in the ground were steel or had a really high conductivity. What happens if we double, triple, quadruple the airflow rate? What happens if we add more pipes underground? What happens if we reduce more pipes underground? All of those types of things were things that we tested to see where the limiting factor was. As a result of it, we found out that they do work, and the greenhouse that we've just built just to the right of me here will actually stay above zero until about mid-January for my climate, which is absolutely unbelievable because we get to -40 here on a regular basis without any fossil fuels. So that's a huge achievement. We're going to actually test it now and see if empirically that holds true. And if it does, that's great. And if it doesn't, then we'll report it, win, lose, or draw. That's our job as instructors and testers and scientists and researchers. So that's underway right now. And so watch out for that white paper. But the main thing I wanted to show here was that there's a needs and yields analysis going on here between the ground and the air. Really cool thing we found out was that the energy stored in the greenhouse isn't just enough storage for daily storage. We actually are able to shift energy from one season to another. And that was not something that I was anticipating. In fact, I've always thought that the best that this system could actually do was just like a daily shift, so to speak. So if you're just signing in, guys, introduce yourself in the chat window. We're going to be going through a few case studies tonight. This is part of the live stream series that we've been doing to launch our online permaculture design course, which is registration for that's closing on Sunday night. So just in a few days. This is the only permaculture design course that we're going to be doing online for the next 12 months. And so if you have any questions about that course, please put them up into the chat window. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that we talked about, put them up into the chat window. It was really generous of JEG711. I have not received too many super chats, but thank you very much for that $5. That was very generous of you to ask a question. I'm just very grateful. It's never happened to me before. So thank you very much. So I'm going to share a couple more photos here of this greenhouse because there's more to this greenhouse than just the subterranean heating and cooling system that I want to show you guys. If I can just find the right image here, then just give me 2 seconds. So like I said, the greenhouse basically has, here we go. This is what I was looking for. A root cellar, a kitchen, and a greenhouse. Now this is an early rendering, and that's why there's a dead deer that has not been skinned inside of the root cellar. It's kind of a funny image, but just ignore that for a second. So this is the JEG 711. The course here, I'll give you a link to it, is at our website, vergepermaculture.ca. And let me just get you a link, and then I can keep going here with this. Sorry about that. This Zoom panel is very difficult to work with sometimes. Here's the information for the course there. So coming back to this image here, we've got the root cellar, we've got the kitchen, and we've got the greenhouse. Now, I want you to kind of keep this floor plan in mind, because a root cellar, what we're trying to do here is keep the root cellar cold, right? That's how we keep food preserved. And depending on the type of food we're trying to preserve will depend on whether we want cold and humid or cold and dry. The kitchen wants to be warm, because when you're cooking, you want to be comfortable. And so likely you'd be in here when your greenhouse is warm. And so there are some potential synergies. Now, the other thing that goes on inside of a root cellar is as the food slowly does decay, because it will over time, it releases CO2 and gases. Those gases are actually plant food. And so we want to be able to move the air from the root cellar into the greenhouse. And then the last thing is that when you finish your food preservation, so the food moves from the greenhouse into the kitchen, then the food from the kitchen can move into the root cellar. And so there's a lot of synergies between here. And so I want to show another image here, which will kind of complete the concept of this greenhouse for you guys. I think you'll get a better sense of what's going on here now. So there we go. Another share. So in the wintertime, we've got these additional pipes that go outside the actual greenhouse themselves. And these are called earth tubes. And so in the wintertime, we're going to have lots of sun. So in the winter, in our greenhouses up here in Calgary, we can have plus 20 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit when it's, minus 20 degrees Celsius and what would that be, 0 or minus 5 Fahrenheit outside. So we can have a massive temperature differential between the inside of the greenhouse and the outside of the greenhouse, just because of the amount of solar energy being picked up by this space. And that's great. And so that means that little fan system is working and we're storing heat underground. You know, and we've got this root cellar down here. And so what we want to do to keep the air fresh inside the root cellar is we want to bring in some of that really cold air outside, and we bring it underground. And the ground at 8 feet below the surface here stays at about 4 degrees Celsius where I'm from. And so the air will warm up to ground temperature as it moves slowly through these pipes and enters into the root cellar. And so now we have the perfect temperature of air inside of the root cellar with fresh air. So any of those products of decomposition, CO2, or products that can build up inside of a root cellar and become dangerous are now going to be flushed out of there with this fresh air moving through these earth tubes. And then as the air moves through the earth tubes, it fills in the root cellar that I just showed you. That air then gets pushed out of the root cellar and into the greenhouse. And so now those products of decomposition are now going to feed the plants inside the greenhouse. And so we're using that stale air in the greenhouse to provide food for the plants in the actual greenhouse itself. Now, when we go through the winter time, pulling really cold air underground, we end up building up a really big layer of ice in here. And so we end up storing another form of energy, which I refer to as coolth. And the coolth essentially is stored ice underground. Now, when the summertime comes, and I'm just going to change my screen share here again one more time and share a different image with you guys. Oh, I gotta stop that. And I move to the summertime. Then we can take a peek at, for some reason it's not showing up there. Just give me a second. So the reverse holds true in the summertime. And so now we've got really hot air outside. The greenhouse is too warm, even though we've got that subterranean heating and cooling system going on. And so now we bring in warm air from the outside to flush out the root cellar. It then moves through the ground layer. And because we've stored all that ice all winter long, we've got a really deep layer of permafrost now. That air cools down, keeping the root cellar nice and cold, which is what we want because it's an earth fridge. And then it moves any decomposition products back into the greenhouse, but it also provides a cooling benefit to the greenhouse as well. And so now the earth tubes basically move the excess cold from the winter into the summer. And then during the summertime, this warm air moving through the ground is going to pre-warm the ground so that at the end of the summer, the earth has actually stored a little bit of extra thermal energy so that it actually can provide a bit of a heating benefit in the wintertime. And so again, we're using this concept of integrated design, which is what permaculture is really good at doing, and looking at how to combine disparate systems so that we get a multitude of benefits, so to speak. And so that's how we would do that inside of a greenhouse. Now, the other really cool thing about this greenhouse, let me go back. We've got another image I can show you guys here, and then we'll move on to a different case study. Let me just, this is an interior rendering of the actual greenhouse itself. And keep in mind, when you do a render, you kind of have to choose the lens that you use within the rendering program. And so this render used a really wide angle lens. And so here's the pipes that kind of come through into the greenhouse, and they bring in that air from the root cellar. We've got a hot tub in the corner here. Keep in mind, if renders are never true to real life, and so we wouldn't have a wood floor in here. We'd have a lot more growing space than we've got in this particular picture. This is just to give you a sense of what the inside might look like. You would look quite a bit different than this. I just have to state that. But the hot tub would basically provide us with a source of gray water. We could heat the water with a wood stove. And so when the water was cooling down, it would also be a form of thermal mass. That water, as it cooled down, like I said, then could be used to irrigate the plants. And then new water could be collected or brought in from a rainwater harvesting system underneath the floor of this kitchen. And so we could keep fresh water in the hot tub on a regular basis. And so now we're not wasting any water. Every time we change the water out in the hot tub, we don't have to use chemicals. And then the water that we're using becomes an irrigation source. And so we use the water multiple times to get multiple benefits out of it, as opposed to using chlorine or bromine or anything like that. And so now we've got this kitchen space, we've got this growing space, we've got this relaxation space. We're using our greenhouse for all sorts of different things, as opposed to just growing food. It becomes a sanctuary, so to speak. And so this is just one of the many designs that we've got. And I think it really does a good job of explaining this concept of integrated design. So, yeah, if you're just signing in, just let us know you're calling in from, and one thing you hope to get out of tonight. We're going to be going through a series of case studies. These are projects that we've worked on for past clients. I'm going to now open up another one. I'm going to go through the project that had that greenhouse in it. We're going to now fractal out into a full property design and look at what permaculture design looks like on the broad acre. And then later we'll maybe fractal back down and look at what it looks like on the urban type of property here. So let me just pull that up. And so this was a property that I worked on maybe six years ago. It's a really amazing property, and parts of it are still in construction because it takes a long time to build these properties out. But the concept is totally sound. So if you're just signing in right now, we are doing a live stream going through some case studies talking about what permaculture looks like on the small and large, and specifically trying to get across this idea of integrated design. We are launching our online permaculture design course. The course registration closes this Sunday night, and so there's only a few days left to get into it. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the permaculture design course, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask any questions. What makes our course a little bit different is that it's live like this for all the classes. So we have no pre-recorded content other than the first couple of videos that you get to get started off. And so we respond to you in a real-time basis, answering any of the questions that you've got. We've never offered a course this inexpensive. It's about half the price of our in-person PDC. And we have people literally showing up from all over the planet. So if you want some information on that course, I'm just going to put a link up into the PDC. Feel free to ask any questions that you have on the course itself. So Riley asks, for questions later, do you think any of your designs could be converted to a prefabricated format? Maybe. There's definitely things like the greenhouse that we just talked about that could be. However, every bioregion is going to be a little bit different. And so every property ends up being a little different, which is one of the reasons that we teach people how to design their own property, so that you can basically adapt the ideas and principles to different pieces of property around the planet. I can't speak tonight. Sorry about that. Anyhow, so there definitely could be things like, I think there's an opportunity for people to get into the prefabricated greenhouse business. And I suspect that there'd be other components that we could brainstorm that would be really effective at prefabricating and then, selling multiple units, IKEA style. But really, a lot of these designs do need to be customized, and the people that are living on the land need to customize them, because not only is the land different, but the people that are operating the land are different. And so they're going to have different wants and needs. And so it's tough to totally automate or prefabricate everything. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, so this property was 5 acres, and this house is built now, and it is one of the lowest energy buildings in all of Alberta. This house is around 1,800 square feet, and it consumes about the same amount of energy as one burner, the big burner on your electric stove at home. It is so energy efficient. The entire house is built out of wood, so it's got something called cross-laminated timber panels, and then it has wood fiber for insulation. So it's completely a healthy home as well. There's no red list chemicals inside of the house. and it's also off grid. And so all of the power comes from a photovoltaic array that sits up here on the shop. The shop has the battery array inside of it as well, so it stores its own power. It's got a backup generator in the event that they're not getting enough electricity. There's an umbilical cord that runs to the actual house itself, and that provides electricity to the home. And then there is solar thermal on the roof, which provides for the domestic hot water, and any surplus energy from those solar thermal panels gets injected into an in-floor heating system. In the event that the solar thermal system and the boiler inside the house is insufficient, in the event that the solar thermal is insufficient and it's not getting enough passive solar gain, there's a boiler as a backup, which almost never turns on. It only turns on for a couple of hours per year. And they were required to have a boiler in order to meet code, unfortunately. And so this house has got a couple of really neat features. It has a underground pipe that goes under the driveway, and this pipe exchanges glycol at about 8 feet below grade. And so when it gets really cold outside, this glycol loop preheats any fresh air incoming into the house, so that it doesn't freeze up the heat exchanger, which exchanges all of the air inside of the building. The solar thermal system, which is the panels up here on the roof, takes any excess solar energy through the summertime, and it actually stores extra energy underground so that it has that heat storage mechanism. So again, there's an integration between the ground loop and the solar thermal loop up on the roof. The house deals with all of its wastewater in a small septic tank over here. So the water flows with gravity over to the septic tank, and then the septic tank runs its effluent through a mound that feeds a forest. And so in Alberta, we have a class of septic system called an at-grade system, and at-grade systems are designed in such a way that they can dispose of their effluent in a forest, meaning that the treatment mechanism is actually the LFH layer, which is the leaf layer or the leaf mold layer on the surface of the forest. Now, there's nothing in the code that says that you can't build an at-grade system without a forest and then build the forest around the at-grade system. And so we decided that this property really needed a shelter belt in order to reduce the amount of wind coming across the property. And so the shelter belt is on the north and west corner. And in order to get the shelter belt to grow as quickly as possible, we partnered the shelter belt with the septic system, because the septic system is basically just a really expensive irrigation system, except that it's got lots of nutrient in it. And so now the shelter belt is growing with septic effluent. So I'm just going to move over to a couple of questions here. Edgar from Toronto, I'd like to know if you have designed or implemented, pondered a passive solar greenhouse with chicken coop. Will your upcoming passive solar greenhouse course / book cover a design? So you can do that, Edgar, but you got to be really cautious when you combine livestock and greenhouses together. So when you have the decomposing manure in a greenhouse, it releases ammonia and it can burn the plants. So you gotta be really cautious when you combine those two elements together. There are ways to do it. Sol Viva is a book that was produced that attempted to combine those two elements, and it can be done, but just done with caution. We will probably not be talking about that in a future book on greenhouses. Although I would like to write a book on greenhouses, I haven't started that process yet. Curtis Robinson asks, is the solar thermal evacuated tubes? Yes, I'm a big fan of the evacuated tube collectors. They're very efficient. One evacuated tube collector will produce about 7,500 BTUs of energy per hour, versus a flat panel collector is around 2,000 or 3,000 BTUs per hour. So it's a substantially larger amount of energy. So as I was saying, the septic effluent feeds the shelter belt. We had to put the garden really far away from the house because the amount of wind makes it really challenging for us to grow food close to the house, which is why we placed it next to the shelter belt. And then given the bioregional constraints and the wind and the cold, we designed this passive solar greenhouse kitchen root cellar, which we had just finished talking about at the beginning of this session. And so the majority of the food will be produced here, canned in the kitchen, and then stored in the root cellar, which again, it's kind of far away from the house, but there are a couple of other constraints that we had to deal with here. We had a gas line coming through the property, and then the other one was we had a drainage swale coming through the property that was fed water every year from snowmelt from the neighbor's yard. And so we wanted to take advantage of that seasonal flow, which is why we placed the house and the shop where we did. And then we put a food forest right in the center turn circle here. And so we put 6 feet of topsoil into this rain garden. So it has an enormous amount of infiltration capacity, and the trees are very happy with all that topsoil there. And then the water flows out down this really gently sloping ditch, which has also got a lot of topsoil in it. And this part hasn't been built yet, but the intention is that this water will get captured and stored in a pond at the bottom of the property right here. This creates a fire shelter, but it also will infiltrate water along a swale that moves across the bottom of the property. This swale will then grow a shelter belt. And the idea is that we design this house so that when a small enough wood stove is available, that the trees that are growing both on the inside of the shelter belt, but also along this ditch here, can be coppiced, which means that they can be cut and they'll grow back again. They don't die when they get cut. They actually produce more branches. And so the trees here can be coppiced and will produce enough fuel so that the house doesn't actually have to rely on any backup propane on those days where there's not enough sun coming in to keep the solar thermal systems going, or enough passive solar. And so the idea is that the property is self-sufficient with energy, eventually it'll be self-sufficient with food. And then lastly, the property harvests all of its own rainwater. And so there's an underground cistern right here, and it captures all the rainwater off the roof and off of the garage, and can meet a substantial amount of the water that they require on an annual basis. And so this integrates food, energy, shelter, water, and waste all onto a pretty small property to be mostly self-sufficient on an annual basis. And I really like this. This property was a really fun property to design. So Vita asks, would there be concerns with attaching a house to a greenhouse or root cellar? So yeah, absolutely, Vita. There definitely are concerns there. You have to think about moisture and mold and condensation. And so you have to really carefully think about the materials that you use. If you're attaching a greenhouse to a house, you want to make sure that if there is a vapor drive from the greenhouse, because there's a lot of vapor in a greenhouse, into the house itself, that you've got to put the right wall conditioning on so that the vapor doesn't move through the wall into the house. And there are ways to manage that. We're going to put a greenhouse and attach it to our house here in Alberta, probably next year, if all goes well. And we will show that all the steps along the way. And this will become part of our passive solar greenhouse course, but we will continue to produce YouTube videos, of course, of the whole process. Great question. So if you're just signing up and are signing into YouTube, let us know where you're calling in from. We're going through case studies, and the kind of theme for tonight is integrated design. And so I've been talking about various different design projects that we've had over the years. I'm going to move to a property that's north of the property we just talked about. It's a slightly larger property. And then after that, depending on where people are at, if they want to talk about a smaller property, we can. Or we can continue on the theme of large properties if that's more in the liking, or if people want to see larger properties versus smaller properties. We do have a few urban properties we can talk about. All the ideas remain the same. The scale just kind of gets a bit smaller. So we are doing this session tonight because we're launching our online permaculture design course. And so this is the last course that we're going to do for the next 12 months. The registration for that course ends on Sunday night at midnight. And the course is completely live. We go live 3 times a week on a Zoom channel. We did this at the beginning of COVID, and as a response to the students that had signed up for our in-person courses. And it was unbelievable. I've just about finished marking all the projects that came in. I had over 40 of the 50 students that signed up to have me mark my students. So each of the teachers got different students assigned to them for their design projects. And all the different teachers got about 50 different projects. And almost all of my students submitted projects, and they are absolutely unbelievable. And so we let people design their own properties. They go through the design process and produce a set of drawings on how they're going to basically design their design their property for energy, water, waste, shelter, food, security, and bring all those components together in a similar way that we're doing right now. And so we've been getting absolutely hammered with requests for consultancy. People are very concerned about the state of the world. They're concerned about where their food is going to come from. They're concerned about how they're going to heat their homes. A lot of people are really worried about how they're going to actually have a job out of all of this stuff. And the permaculture design space is exploding right now. People want to deal and get resilient with regards to their food, energy, water, and shelter. And there's just no way that I can take all the consulting calls. And so we've actually shut down consulting requests on my website. And so this online course is our attempt at getting people trained up so that they can start offering these services first to themselves, but then to other people outside of their circles. And we were really worried with regards to whether or not the online format would really translate permaculture across in the same way that a live course does. We've been teaching live courses for over 10 years. We had over 600 students come through our programs, and a bunch of them are teaching now, and a whole swath of them are actually out consulting. As we got into the teaching online through Zoom, we were absolutely blown away by the amount of community that got formed. And also, like I said, the design projects that people produced as a result of it. So if you're interested in that course, you can take a look at our website, vergepermaculture.ca. I'll put a link to the course in the comment section there. If you have any questions about the course, please feel free to throw that into the chat window there. I'm just going to look at a few questions here. Cassie would love to see an urban example. Sure, Cassie, we'll do that after this. I'll chuck one up there. Vita says, thanks for the online version. It's opened up opportunities for those of us too busy to travel for days at a time and attend. Yeah, absolutely. Slugs and Snails from Ireland. Nice to meet you. Really interested in this. This makes sense to me. Does your course include food storage preservation? What about the time difference for your course? Love to see a small property case study. Sure. So all the sessions are recorded and put onto a learning dashboard. So if you can't make all of the sessions, you can catch up. I think we're about 6 or 7 hours difference in time from Ireland. We actually had a student from Germany attending, and she stayed up and watched them. She absolutely loved it. And so it is possible, depending on if you have little ones and you're sleep deprived like we are sometimes. But if you can't make all of the sessions, they are recorded and placed up there. As far as food preservation goes, absolutely, Carmen talks about that. But what's really great about the live format of the course is that we talk about what you guys want to talk about. We pivot to you. All your questions get answered pretty much in real time. And then the other really cool thing is I just talked to one of my TAs today, is that we have student-led sessions. And so our students come from all over the place and different walks of life, different skill sets. And so Cassie, who's on the call right now, actually ended up leading a session on GIS, graphical information systems. We had another student in the last class who led a session on project management. And so if there are specific sessions that you want, we can facilitate additional sessions, either from our own instructors or from students that have expertise in specific areas. So yes, all that stuff, we try and cover absolutely everything. There's 100 hours of content. We have a whole slew of teachers, and we can curate specific content if there's a specific need for our students. Curtis asks, I started a food forest and built a passive solar house 10 years ago. It's really nice to have food security. Rob knows the stuff. Great opportunity. Thanks, Curtis. That's really nice of you to say. Appreciate it. Yeah, Cassie said, I called it Google Earth for Permies. Nice one. And people loved that course, Cassie. It's actually still up on the dashboard there. So you may have some students reaching out to you afterwards. Coach Drew for DIY Permaculture Gardens. I work on ecological landscaping projects. Awesome. Great to have you on board here, Coach Drew. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about this property. So this is a quarter section of land. It was a little bit less than a quarter section, so 160 acres. And the couple that got involved wanted to actually malt barley for the purpose of providing the microbrewing industry here in Alberta with custom malted barley. And so the design project basically had to design a malting house, which is this facility right here. We had to have a really nice turnaround driveway at the top of the house, top of the property, so that trucks could come in with new grain and then leave with malted grain to go to the microbreweries. Now, one of the constraints of the malting industry is it uses a lot of water, and when the barley is being malted, basically what happens in the malting process is barley gets put into a tank, it gets steeped, and so the water basically gets absorbed into the actual barley itself. And then as the barley is soaking in the water, it releases nutrients out of it. And so this happens several times in the process. In fact, you change the water 3 or 4 times during the malting process. And so all that water has to go somewhere. And so typically, if you look at the malting operations in cities, they just chuck that water down the sewer, which is a complete disaster. And so whenever a system doesn't meet its needs from within, it creates energy and pollution. And so what we decided to do was mimic a toilet tank. And so we created these ponds right here. And so every time the malting operation got rid of its water, it would send its water to one of the 3 toilet tanks. And so we would accumulate this water from the malted barley. Now, malted barley, we actually took barley for our clients. We malted it for them. So we soaked it several times, and then we sent it off to a lab to determine how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium was in that water. And it turned out that it had enormous amounts of nutrient, which makes sense because the nutrient was basically being leached off of the grain. And what we wanted to do was take that water and put it to productive use. And so in permaculture, we have this idea, this mantra, and this is a very valuable idea that Lawton kind of came up with. And it was kind of an extrapolation of what Mollison was talking about when he came up with the design system, which is water, access, and structures. So first you design the water systems, then you design the access systems, and then you design the structures. And so we built swales on contour, and it just happened that the contour map allowed us to put these swales in right here. And then these toilet tanks would basically have pipes going to each of the swales on contour. And so every time one of these tanks got filled, we could then gravity feed it, because this was higher up in the landscape than these swales below them. And we could flood irrigate each of these swales. Now, each of these swales would have tree or shelter belts growing on them. This property also had a lot of wind on it. And so we wanted to make sure we cut down the amount of wind coming across it. And it also had drought issues. And so this water then would then flood irrigate these swales, which would then allow these trees to grow rapidly. As a result of these swales as well, because of the amount of snow that we get here, these trees would then collect snow melt. Now, snow, when you can walk on it, so in a snowdrift situation, is up to 60% solid water. And so as these trees start to grow, the shelter belt, both around the property as well as these shelter belts on contour, they would start to accumulate more snow over time. And so as that snow melts, typically in our ecosystem, all like 30 to 40% of the water that comes here comes in the form of snow. And so when that snow melts in the springtime, all the ground is frozen. And so we basically have 100% runoff, which is atrocious. And so the way that that water would have been managed before we started manipulating the ecosystem is that we would have had beavers all over the landscape. And these beaver dams would be able to take that snow melt and absorb it into the actual beaver dam itself. But because we've killed most of the beavers now, we actually have to mimic the pattern of the beaver. And so the beaver pattern ends up in these ponds. And so we would create ponds on contour in places that made sense to have them. And so as the snow melted, the snow would get accumulated in the swales. Now, swales are basically ditches on contour. They would fill up these ponds. And then as a result of filling up those ponds, they would basically drought proof the property. And so we would typically put a solar pump somewhere in the landscape, probably at the lowest set of ponds, and then we would pump water back up to the top of the landscape. Now, because they're going to be working in this malting barn, we wanted to give them access to a house that was nice and close. And so this house was oriented to the south. So south is over here, meaning they could have passive solar gain. They would have a pond right outside their door. We could fill this pond up with fish so they could fish, a little dock right there. And now their work is just a short walk across the driveway. We didn't go into the detail of designing their gardens, but we did actually decide to put a food forest on this side of the shelter belt. There's also going to be another food forest right here. Gardens would make tons of sense to have kind of all around in here, depending on what they wanted. All of the paddocks were set up on contour with electric fencing so that you could delineate out different sizes of pastures and move your animals rotationally through all of these different systems. We had a very clearly delineated access both around the property as well as through the center. And then a corral system at the top. And this was really important because the corral system allowed us to take any of the byproducts that were not be able to be used in the actual process itself and feed them to the livestock up here. And so the owners wanted to have pigs and cows as part of their the products that they produced on their farm. And so having access to those corrals close to the house made a ton of sense. This also meant that when animals returned back up to the corral, they brought the manure with them. Compost could be produced, and then it could be distributed further down slope as required. And so this design, Jade says, this design is a thing of beauty. The reason that this design looks beautiful is that it's actually working with the natural patterns of the landscape. And so everything is designed on contour. It works with the natural tendency of the land. And when we do that, we never have to worry about the aesthetics of the property. The aesthetics kind of just come out all on their own. Vida, this is a quarter section. And so it's a full 160, actually it's not quite a full 160 acres. It's a little bit less than that because of the section up here. But it was a fairly large piece of property. It looks a bit more rectangular than square. Typically a quarter section is something that would, it would look a little bit more square than this, but this was quite a large piece of property. And so if you're just signing in right now, just let us know where you're coming in from. I'm just going to take a look at some of the chats here. Kevin Beal, hi, thank you for doing this. I hope to move to a house and yard this summer. I do not have the time or space to start a personal permaculture project till then. Could you suggest a course for that timing? So Kevin, depends on what happens with COVID. There's a few different online course offerings out there. We're not going to offer another course for another 12 months after this. We're going to probably be launching online courses every November. And so our course offering right now starts as of Sunday. The registration closes this Sunday coming up. And then the course runs for 3 months. Depending on the course that you take with us, we will be offering an upgrade at some point through our online course where you can have an unlimited return policy. So if you were to get the course now, you can upgrade and come back to as many of the PDCs as you want. Every PDC is a little different. We have different instructors each time. Obviously, the students change. And we really do customize the content to the people taking the course. So last course, a lot of the students actually upgraded the program that they were in to be able to take an unlimited refresher. Now, with that upgrade, which gets offered in the course, part of the way through the course, we end up packaging in our passive solar greenhouse course, we package in our rainwater harvesting course, and we package in all of the other digital content that we've been building for the last 10 years. And you get all of that for a fraction of what it would cost if you bought it all individually. So that offer does get given to the students when they're enrolled in the online PDC. So that might be something of interest. If you are interested in that, get in touch with us. We'll be happy to hop on a phone with you and determine whether or not the course is a fit for you. We promise to be honest. And if it's not a fit, then we won't try and, encourage you to take it. So, Mariala, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Is there a reason why the house is better in a corner than in the center of a property? I thought the center would be better for more working zones. So that's a great question. It turns out, so the way this image is drawn, we've got all these roads that are drawn kind of as high grade roads. These would probably be just farm roads. They wouldn't be graveled like they're shown in this picture. It's just hard to see access if we don't change the color of it in an image like this. But roads themselves are very expensive to build. And so when you build a house, you want to build it as close to the main road as possible to save as much money as you can. So the only real gravel that we'd have in this situation is this pad right here, as well as probably the road going to the house. Everything else would be just a farm path. So it'd be just grass or at most, maybe we might plow some of the topsoil off of it and have just kind of subsoil there. But in reality, we're not going to be putting gravel on all of these roads. So generally, we try and get the house and as close to the main road as possible to save cost. People do like the idea of having a house further away from the main road because it's quieter. But when you start looking at the cost of putting in these high grade gravel roads and maintaining them and plowing them in our climate, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's a good question. Thanks for that. So I can't read your name. Permaculture channel. Sorry. Hello from suburban Calgary. I'm currently taking a PDC with another school in the States, as I didn't know that Verge had us at the time when I started, but I'm trying to get my husband to sign up for the course. Oh, okay, no problem. Well, get in touch with us if you have any questions. Like I said earlier, our course has never been less money. Typically, it's over $1,300, $1,400, even it's been as high as $2,000, depending on the package that you take for the in-person course. This course is $699 plus GST. It happens over 3 months. If your husband takes it, you can sit behind the camera at the same time. We don't count the number of people behind the camera. And so if you're going to take it with somebody else, you can get a really great deal there. If there's multiple people in your house, we've had entire homeschool families take this. So their kids participate in the lessons and participate in the design of their own property. That's one ticket. So use this as an opportunity for homeschooling and get your whole family educated within permaculture. Each ticket will come with one certificate. So if you want to each have a certificate, that's a different situation. And so one ticket gets you one certificate and one design marked. And so if that sounds interesting, hop into the course. I think we'd love to have you. Marina asks, are you planning to teach about water saving and solar power in your course? Absolutely. We talk about water harvesting that represents at least 6 to 8 hours of the content. Last session, we had an entire section on renewable energy. That section is still available to the PDC students. So Tom Jackman from Simple Solar taught that. I'm very well versed in renewable energy, and I'm happy to answer any questions that there is about renewable energy systems, solar, wind, solar thermal, as well as passive solar house design. That's what I do day in and day out. And so I'm quite happy to answer any questions that you've got on that. John King, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, USA, recently got married and bought a home with a little bit of land, room for a garden, and eventually a passive solar greenhouse. Awesome. That sounds great, John. Love to see what you plan on building there. Permaculture channel. The thing is, he's working Monday to Friday. Do you think he will still benefit from not being able to attend real time and ask questions during class and so on? So if he's attending on Sundays, then he can attend real time. All the classes get recorded and put up onto the learning management system. So he's more than welcome to watch those at that time. If you're available to watch them, then you can watch them as well. As long as he can get his questions in, then we'll make sure that we get them answered. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to talk about here. I guess I can just kind of close out with the fact that we wanted to find, again, integrated opportunities to combine the malting facility, the wastewater from the malting facility with the shelter belts. One of the components that we put into the shelter belt was actually sea buckthorn. Sea buckthorn is a really valuable berry. It's a nitrogen fixer. The tea leaves are worth over $17 an ounce when they're dried. They're a windbreak, they're drought hardy, and they grow really, really well in our climate. And so they were going to get a berry yield, they were going to get a livestock yield, they were going to get fuel wood to keep their house warm, they were going to get a shelter belt benefit, and then multiple drought proofing ponds. And so again, really trying to create that integrated closed loop cycle on this property. Okay, so I'm gonna bring up an urban property now that we designed several years ago. So let me just pull those images up, see if I can find them for you guys. We're gonna shrink the scale down to an urban scale property, if I can find it. Let me just open this up. Just gotta find the client's last name here for you guys. And so if you're just signing in, please let us know where you're calling in from. And I'm going to bring up another project and talk about another case study from a small urban property. So let me just start with some before images so you guys can get a sense of this piece of land. And let's see if I can share a few different photos here just to kind of get you guys up to speed. Yeah, perfect. Okay. We are doing a series of live streams over the last 2 weeks, so you can get caught up on those if you'd like. I basically did a truncated introduction to permaculture. Those are all still up on our channel there. Dakota Cohen did a session on integrated livestock or gardening with livestock. Carmen Lamoureux did a permaculture gardening session. And then I did 2 introduction to permaculture sessions to start it all off. So those will be up until Sunday at midnight. And then we're going to be taking them down. So if you want to watch that, make sure that you get in on that. We are doing this as a launch to our online permaculture design course. The registration closes Sunday night at midnight. The course is going to happen over 3 months. We meet 3 times a week on Zoom. And I know it sounds really inhumane or impersonal, impersonal to be kind of teaching a course like this over Zoom. But given the circumstances, we trialed this out at the beginning of this whole COVID lockdown. And I can't believe the types of projects that people produced as a result of it. We had an incredible response of students, and so we decided to do again. We're only going to be teaching this online course once every 12 months, and given that we're probably going down into another lockdown, we think that it's absolutely crucial that people start to get their supply chains in order. And so we want to give people the information that they need to be able to design their property, to produce their own food, collect their own water, collect their own energy, and figure out how to heat their homes in a regenerative way. And even I've been getting a lot of requests for people that want to start their own permaculture businesses, start consulting and helping other people through this. I've had an incredible surge of interest in our consulting offering, and I can't help everybody. And so the only way that I've been able to scale up the distribution of this information is through this online course. And so we've literally cut the cost of the course in half. It used to be well over $1,300. It's now only $6.99 Canadian. So if you're calling in from the States, it's basically free when you take the exchange rate into account. And so tonight we've been going through a series of case studies. We've gone through a couple of rural properties, and now we're going to talk about this urban property here in Calgary. So I got this call from a client in Calgary, and they wanted to basically retrofit this property that they had bought. They wanted to put an Airbnb or mother-in-law suite on the property. They wanted to grow a pile of their own food. They had a really big slope here, which is kind of hard to see, which represented a liability for them. They had to deal with it. And because of the slope of this corner lot, most of the property was unusable because the slope was so extreme. They wanted to look at retrofitting their own house as well, reducing the energy consumption, increasing the comfort of the home, and reducing kind of utility bills. And so that was the design brief. They also wanted to have a garage to park their cars and or potentially a workshop. And so when a client comes to us with all of these constraints, we actually do a really big amount of work in order to constrain down the options and try and understand what those constraints actually are. And so one of the first things that we have to constrain is what the land use bylaw allows. So we go back to the city and we look at the land use bylaw documents and try and understand what constraints the city requires of us before we start changing the shape of the landscape. I'm just going to go over to the comments here for a second here and answer any questions, and then we can go back into this case study. So Curtis Robinson says, I've taken multiple permaculture courses and feel that I've gotten as much or more from the online courses. It gives you much more time to think through the concepts and ask questions. Yeah, it's an interesting format. I mean, we get 3 months with you guys. And so you get all the information in smaller bites versus having to sit down and listen to a course for 6 hours a day. So that's really nice. And then you get the benefit of having all these other students. One of the cool things that we did in the last course is we got one of our programmers to create a decentralized map so people could see exactly where they were all over the planet. And we partnered people up in similar bioregions. And so we actually got people to start communicating with each other when they were close to each other bioregionally. Cassie says, it was an amazing experience and the perfect antidote to COVID lockdown worry. Yeah, totally. Kevin Beal says, I forgot to write that you're from Cleveland, Ohio. Awesome, welcome. Nice to have you calling in from the east side of the country. Marina, what time during the day will the course be? So the course runs from 4 o'clock Mountain Time. So that's the time zone that we're in. And it runs for 3 hours. So 4 till 7. And so we do 2 hours of content and then 1 hour of Q&A 3 times a week. And everything gets recorded. It gets placed up onto the learning management system. We then have TAs that take the content and they timestamp it. And so as we're going through, they're making notes of what we're talking about, and then they timestamp the video. So you don't have to watch the whole video if you don't want. You can specifically go to the parts of the video that are most interesting to you. And so that makes it really searchable and easy to go back if you need to go to a specific video. We actually timestamp it. And so you can imagine that's an enormous amount of work. And so we have TAs that are listening. We also have a real-time note-taking group of students as well. And so we get students to actually build an interactive note pack for you guys. So we're taking notes in terms of what books we recommend and resources. And then you guys actually build your own note pack as we go along. Okay, back to the case study here. And so again, we had this really steep slope. They wanted to grow food. They wanted a garage. And so now let's just look at a couple more images to kind of get a sense of, let me just shrink this down just a little bit so that I can see it. My camera's kind of in the way here. That's what I'm looking over to get a sense of this image here. Okay, so I'll just show you a couple more aerial images so you can kind of get a sense of what this property looks like. We had some kind of older trees here. It's in the fall. This is the north side of the property here, so this is quite shady. We had this kind of decrepit old set of stairs, and this fence had to be replaced. This retaining wall was completely rotten. Oops, there's another image from the house. Here it is from another angle. So we had an old patio right here. Downspouts, we had a rain barrel right there. We had another downspout over here, if I remember correctly. There's the north side. So we had this kind of coniferous little forest, a big long sidewalk. So when I see a sidewalk like this, that's an opportunity to harvest snow. Snow is a form of water. And so depending on where you throw it will depend on whether your property can use it. And then depending on how you design your property will depend on whether it can actually put that snow to productive use. Here it is from the earth. And so there you can kind of really see this, the slope that we're dealing with on this property right here. There's my car. Okay, so let's now change the image. I'm just going to change my screen sharing here and go to the illustrations that we did for this property. Oops. Okay, we're just going to load this image up if I can. Perfect. Okay. So here's the 3D render of the project, that the same property, but we just took Lumion, that same software that we were using, and we rendered up a project here. So let's just go back to the chat here and answer some questions. Marina says, what time? Oh, Vita says, my migraine, sorry, my migrate into Google Maps says 3 p.m. Mountain Time. Oh, I might have, maybe I said that wrong. I might, it might actually be starting at 3 o'clock. I apologize, guys. I think Vita's right. I think it's 3 to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I apologize for that. Okay, so let's go back to this case study here. So what we did, the house obviously stayed the same. We would get an earth mover in here and basically change the shape of the landscape. And then we would build in a garage in the bottom right here. And so this garage would act as a retaining wall. We would then continue the retaining wall on all the way around. And the retaining wall was set based upon the setback that the city provided. So the city requires, I think, 1 meter or 1.5 meters back from the sidewalk right here. And so we're not allowed to permanently develop in this area. And so we would build a fairly substantial retaining wall at that line that the city requires. The stairs then would go up towards the house. And then we get this really beautiful bench up here. So we get a lot of usable land that we can do stuff with. Now they wanted to have a cob oven to be able to have pizza parties and kind of cook outside. So more of an outdoor kitchen. So we built an outdoor kitchen right here with a patio. They wanted a kitchen garden close to their kitchen right here. So we built one there. We changed the forest in the north over to a food forest. So all these trees would be fruit bearing. They can deal with a little bit of shade because they'll actually seek the sun. We created another little space for them to drink coffee out in the morning. They wanted to still have a little bit of grass that their kids could play on. We set up rain tanks so that all the water coming off their house would be harvested and usable. They wanted to have a solar array. Their existing house wasn't really suitable for collecting solar energy. And so we built a shed style roof over top of the mother-in-law suite to collect solar energy. And so the mother-in-law suite sits on top of the garage, which would allow them to either Airbnb it or allow a mother-in-law to live in there. Their garage for 2 cars or a workshop was down here. We'd put a stairway along the other side of the actual garage over here. And then even though they can't do any permanent construction on this right-of-way, we designed a raised bed system that would allow them to grow food along the streetscape. And in the event that the city ever had to tear this up, all of these raised beds could be moved by a forklift. So they could rent a Zoom Boom or a forklift, and they could literally change the location of these garden beds to somewhere else on the property if they had to temporarily, or move them off the property if they had to, so that construction could take place And then when the construction was done, these beds could be brought back in and set back up along the retaining wall. Now, the retaining wall itself actually provides thermal mass, and so you end up getting a lot of growing space here. And when we did the math on this, I can't remember the exact numbers right now, but the amount of food that we could produce in raised beds along this retaining wall was absolutely unbelievable. There's a couple of other raised beds up here on the lawn as well. And then we built a nice little deck there. And so this house collects solar energy, it collects its rainwater, it produces food. The space was a lot more usable. It was very aesthetically pleasing for them. It was not an inexpensive project, obviously. This mother-in-law suite was well over $100,000. The retaining wall was probably close to $40,000 or $50,000, but it kind of met all the constraints that they set forth and met all of their goals at the same time. And so this is an example of an urban property. And I think I had a couple of other images here. So there's before and after. So that's what it looked like before. And this was what we were suggesting it could look like after they were done. This is kind of annotated. And then this is from up above. And so you've got your solar array, our little grass patch here, our coffee drinking place, an outdoor kitchen, and space for kind of hanging out, a deck between the house and the mother-in-law suite, our raised bed gardens along the road. And Cassie asks, how big is this property? I can't remember exactly. I think we're probably about 150 feet long by probably about 50 feet wide, or maybe 40 feet wide. Not sure if that answers your question. There it is again, before and after. So before and after. Yeah, we can probably go through one more case study for folks that haven't are just signing on. I'm happy to go through an urban property, or we can go through a rural property. We've done 2 rural properties. I could take you guys through some aerial images of our permaculture retrofit here in Calgary, Alberta. It's pretty packed with stuff, so we could do that if you guys are interested. I'll just let you guys answer that. And while you're putting your answer up into the chat window there, I'm just going to make another announcement. So these online live sessions that we've been doing have been a response to the launch of our online permaculture design course. That launch is coming to a close. We're going to be closing registration on Sunday, November, I think it's the 24th. What is it here? Sorry, 22nd. November 22nd, we'll be closing registration for our 2020 online PDC. And so we're going to be running this course once per year. So it's the last time you can get in for another 12 months. And the course is $699 Canadian plus GST if you live in Canada. It happens over 3 months. We get together 3 times per week, 3 hours per session. We do 2 hours of content and then answer 1 hour of Q&A. The course is tailored to you because it's live. We're not pre-recording it. And so every session is a little bit different. We make it fun. We have contests that happen. So we have book giveaways. New Society gives us books that we can give away to our students. We have dress up parties, if that doesn't sound too lame for you. We had a pirate night last time, and we had a nature night. And so people show up. It's not a webinar platform. It's actually the Zoom rooms. And so we get to see each other's faces. You get to design your own property, and every project gets marked by a teacher. We do a video review of your session, of your design project with feedback, so that you can design the property of your dreams, large or small. And so if you're thinking about getting into this permaculture design course, I'm going to put a link up in the chat window here, and you can go check it out. That registration closes on Sunday night, so take a look. I'm just going to go over to the chat window here. So Mark Wiley, rural would be great. Tammy Fassett says, I would like to see another urban case study. Your acreage is near Ponoka or further north. So Mark, our acreage is in central Alberta. It's not too far from Ponoka. Blue-eyed Native American. I'd like to see another. Anything in the desert. Actually, so blue-eyed Native American, I would encourage you to check out. I've got a couple of videos on our YouTube channel. Maybe someone can do me a favor and go find that for me. So I've got a 3-part series of Brad Lancaster's property in Arizona. I highly recommend checking out those videos. He goes into great detail on all the different components on his property. I've also got a really neat case study of the Tucson swales, the Avro Valley swales in Tucson, Arizona. So there's a couple great videos on our YouTube channel on that I'd recommend you go check out. They're not that far back, so I'm sure if you scroll through the videos, you'll find them. How is that urban property main house made more energy efficient, Rob? So I didn't show it in the render, but we did recommend a home retrofit. And so that would have included more insulation on the exterior of the wall and an upgrade of the windows. And that would have made a really big difference. And then more insulation in the attic. So great question. So I'm not really getting a huge sway one way or the other. So I'm just going to see. I've got another project up here on my screen. I think I'll go to a property in Ontario. So let's just move all these images into a file folder. It'll make it easier for me to navigate with you guys. And so this is another quarter section of land. If we've got time afterwards and you guys still want to see another urban property, we can go back to our property in Calgary. Jamie Smith asks, will you do more PDCs in the future? I can't now, but I'm very interested in the future. So Jamie, yeah, we're going to do another online PDC next November. I don't know if we're going to do another in-person course. With this whole fiasco that's going on globally, it's really difficult to commit to anything at this point. I do really like the in-person courses, but we did run an in-person course kind of late summer this year, and it was really challenging to kind of navigate the whole lockdown right now. And so right now, I think we're committed to doing more online courses, but we won't have one for another 12 months. We do have an upgrade that you can take in the program that allows you to have an unlimited return policy, and it gives you access to all of our online courses, including our passive solar greenhouse course, our rainwater course, and all of the other digital resources that we have on our website. So you can okay, yeah, can't put a, okay, I'll try and find those links for you guys here shortly. I might swing over to our YouTube channel and take a peek at that and see if I can find those links for you. But if you can find the Verge YouTube channel, you should be able to find those. You should be able to find those links. The Avro Valley swales. I think the Avro Valley swales. The YouTube video is called "Searching for Bill Mollison." It's kind of a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? I can't remember. The reason we called it Searching for Bill Mollison was Bill actually made a video about the Avro Valley swales, and then we ended up going there 30 years later, and they were still there and still doing everything that Bill was talking about. So it's kind of, I can't remember the word that I'm looking for. If you guys know the word that I'm thinking about, you can put it up into the chat there. Okay, so this is a property in Ontario, and I'm not sure why it's not letting me. Just a second here. I'm going to try again. Try to share my screen again. This was another quarter section. And the reason I like rural properties for case studies is because they all have urban properties on them. They're just, they're basically giant properties with a home site. So the home site is right here. And then they've also got all the other stuff on the larger property. And so a lot of rural properties are designed really poorly because people get drunk on space. And so basically they think that they've got all this land and then they put things everywhere. And then as a result of that, they end up being like a hamster on a hamster wheel, and they can never get caught up. There's an old saying that if you run fast enough on a hamster wheel, it feels like you're climbing a ladder, but really you're just not going anywhere. And so this property was didn't look like this when we got there. It was in corn and soy and a bit of pasture. And so they wanted to basically start experimenting with regenerative agriculture. And so we mapped the property out, and you can kind of get a sense there's a bit of a slope here, and then a flat spot up here, and then a riparian zone or creek up here, and then another potential pasture area, and then a forest back here. And so what we did was we mapped it out, and we recommended they put the whole property back in grass, perennial polyculture of grasses, and then plant shelter belts on contour, and then harvest the water that's coming off the property into a pond and a swale system up here in order to kind of rebuild the water cycle. Now in Ontario, they basically set up drainage networks. And so instead of irrigation networks, which we do out in Alberta, they try and drain all the properties so that they can grow substandard crops, in my opinion. So this property had an amazing forest back here. It had oak and hickory, and I think it even had a couple of northern pecans in there. And it's amazing is that this land had never been touched up here. And the soil was chocolate brown, beautiful, organic, rich, unbelievable. And so what's really interesting is when we look at a property, we always go to the best part of the property and we go to the worst part of the property. And the best part of the property, like I said, was in this forest here. And so this tells us what happens when we have a functional water cycle, when we let nature express herself the way that she wants to. And so every ecosystem will move through its own evolutions. And when we allow nature to go through their own evolutions or through her own evolutions, she gives us clues if we have the humility to actually listen to her. And so what we saw was that we had this kind of industrial agricultural system right here that where all the land was basically eroding. It suffered from drought. There was no carbon left in the soil. And it was basically going rapidly downhill towards desertification. And then we had this other property over here with a functional water cycle and a functional nutrient cycle, and it was doing amazing. And so we came back to our client and said, look, your property wants to be a forest, but there are benefits to having a combination of forests and grasses. And so you can set up a silviculture system that will allow you to have the best of both worlds. And so we set up these tree systems, which would help to harvest the snow through the winter time, a swale system, which would take any overland flow and put it into a pond. This pond would allow for gravity water on the rest of the property downhill of it. The trees could be selected, especially in Ontario, because Ontario is the northern tip of the Carolinian forest, which is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet. And so you could literally mimic these forests after the Carolinian forests and use pawpaws and oaks and black walnuts and hickories, all sorts of amazing nut species that could then form the basis of a hog production system where the hogs basically get fattened on nuts, similar to the Iberian pigs that get produced in Spain. And then in between these systems, you could graze cattle or goats or sheep, depending on what you want to do. And then all these blue lines represents the water lines that we run on the property so that the animals can get access to water in a very non-destructive way. So wherever they're grazing, they've got access to water in a very easy way. That way we can prevent them from having to go drink down in the creek here, which is what damages the riparian zone. And then all these white lines represent the different fence systems on the actual property itself. Now they also wanted to, see here if I can find some more photos. There's an aerial one. So here's the kind of the untouched forest, the riparian zone, the pond, the swale, lower pond, and then these shelter belts on Keyline, which are creating all these ecological services. So we also looked at the design of their home yard, and so they wanted to put an expansion on the house. They had all the stone ready to go to expand that house out. They wanted to produce most of their food, so we suggested an attached passive solar greenhouse onto the machine shed, a garden, a food forest, and then basically a kitchen garden and a main crop garden. We also looked at rainwater harvesting as a possibility. And then because they had a concrete corral right here, which accumulated all of the manure through the course of the winter, they had the ability to kind of accumulate all that nutrient and run it into a swale, which is not depicted on this image right here, and fertigate a system to help build one of those shelter belts. So there's the same image from space or from slightly higher in elevation. So a kitchen garden, a main crop garden, passive solar greenhouse, a solar array for electricity and having the ability to be off grid, and then an integrated chicken coop right here, which could get access to their food forest, their main crop, their kitchen garden, or this really incredible little forest ecosystem right here. The chickens could manage the understory of that and fertilize it, as well as manage any of the pests. So again, very kind of tight design. You know, we could have added a lot more into this system, but this was kind of what they were looking for. And so design can be very complex. It can be very compact. It can be very full. It can be less full. And we kind of have touched all of those different scales this evening. A lot of times it's constrained by budget and what people's goals are and what they're trying to achieve. And at the end of the day, it all depends upon our goals. And so one of the first things that we start off with the permaculture design course is a session on how to create your values and vision, which is essentially your goal setting framework. Because if you don't know where you're going, then no wind is favorable. That's one of the quotes that we quote all the time from Socrates, I think. He said, if one does not know to which one port one is going, then no wind is favorable. And so you can take these courses and end up saying, well, I want a greenhouse and I want a root cellar and I want a rocket mass heater and a passive solar house. But the first thing you have to get straight is what's important to you. What are your values? So what are your ethics, and what's your vision? Where do you want to go? And once you know that, then you do an inventory of all the resources that you've got. So we use a resource inventory that was developed by Ethan Rowland and Gregory Landuau, called the 8 Forms of Capital. And so we do a resource inventory. Once you know what resources you've got using the 8 Forms of Capital, then we teach you all the different tools, techniques, and principles that you need in order to design a permaculture property. And then you basically look at your resources and these principles and the piece of property that you're looking at. If you don't have a piece of property, then you can use these principles and these concepts to buy the right piece of property. And then once you've got that property, then you can use those tools and resources to actually design the property of your dreams. And the goal here, the goal that Mollison really set out, I'm going to pull up a quote from him that is really poignant because I think it really gets across, you know, the the time that we are in right now. It's he was such a visionary. He was so far ahead of his time. The quote that really kind of stays in my head every single day, which really gets to the essence of the problem that we're in right now with this lockdown and the insecurity that people feel as a result of the collapse of the systems that we all depend upon. And they're not quite collapsing yet, but they're showing cracks for sure. And I think people are realizing what would happen if the grocery stores didn't have food. I mean, there were shortages, there were seed shortages last year. We ran out of gardening seeds. And so we want to help people to make sure that they're on top of this stuff, that they're getting their garden seeds in the right time. What are the species that you should be purchasing? How should you design these gardens for maximum productivity? How should you get your water system set up? Should you design a food forest? And if so, where should you put it for maximum chance of success? What type of greenhouse is most applicable for your property? Should you get a wood stove? I mean, these are hard questions, and there are thousands of them. And you end up with decision fatigue because you haven't necessarily been thinking about this for the last decade. And so we've got this amazing team of people that can help you to work through all of the questions that you've got. You can probably get a lot of these off of YouTube if you're willing to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours watching videos and determining whether the videos are noise or signal. There's so much. I mean, when I got into this, there was not enough information out there. I had to travel around the world for 3 years. I gave up my oil and gas career to do it. I spent tens of thousands of dollars and years of time to go and collect this information. Now there's too much information, and most of it's garbage, and you don't know who to trust. And so we've assembled a team of engineers, foresters, gardeners, farmers, and technicians that can answer your questions in real time as you're coming up with them. So it doesn't matter if you have land. If you want advice, if you want to have a bunch of trusted advisors in your corner as we go through this crisis, that's what this course is for. We're here for you. So the quote that I was going to say is that the greatest change we need to make is one from consumption to production, even if only on a small scale. In our own gardens, if only 10 of us do this, there's enough for everyone. Hence the futility of revolutionaries who have no gardens, who depend on the very system they attack, and who produce words and bullets and not food and shelter. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more poignant quote. When you have seen literally the world is on fire. We have the potential right now for civil war. And the thing is that if we bring the very system down that we've currently built up and we depend upon before we've built the bridge across to the other side, that we know we need to do, we know that we need to start producing more of our own stuff. We literally depend on China for everything. And right now, global relations with China is fragile at best. Imagine if China stopped shipping their stuff to us. You know, it'd be pretty crazy. Imagine if California ran out of water and we weren't able to buy our vegetables anymore. Imagine if the Ogallala Aquifer ran out of water and, 20% of the global grain production just stopped overnight, which it's going to do sometime in the next 10 years. Imagine if the world ran out of phosphorus, which is probably going to do by 2030. It doesn't matter which of the supply chains we talk about, they're all fragile and they're all they all have the potential to break. And so what are you going to do about it? You can sit around and you can get scared, or you can do something about it. You can take responsibility for your family and for the resources that you have at hand, and you can put them to productive use. And then when you do that and people around you see you doing that, and they see that you're eating amazing food and you've got a smile on your face and you're happy, they'll want to join. We need to make the world, like the designs that we create using permaculture have to taste better. They've got to be more fun. And if we do that, we never have to tell anybody what we don't want to do. We just have to live it and be happy. And the rest of the people will join us because they want that too. Everybody fundamentally wants the same thing. We want our kids to go to school. We want them to eat nutrient-dense food. We want to have wonderful marriages. We want to have wonderful relationships with our kids. It's ultimately about quality of life. It's about well-being. That's what this is all about. It's not about fear. It's not about being a prepper. We do these things to make our life richer and better, because the mode of civilization that we have been working on for the last 100 years has come to the end of the line. We've gone as far as we can go with this version of civilization. And now it's time for something new. It's time for something that actually serves the people and not the oligarchs. I mean, the best way to deal with the billionaires that are accumulating all the resources right now is not to get mad at them. That's the capitalistic system that we've created. It's to start taking care of ourselves. It's to start turning our homes and gardens, which currently consume gobs of money, and gobs of resources, fertilizer and gasoline and lawnmowers, and natural gas to heat our house, and mortgages. Like, you just have to look at the definition of a mortgage to get a sense of what civilization right now means. Mortgage is French for death pledge. Mort is death, and gage is pledge. And so we pay huge amounts of money to live in these houses that we have to go, and up until COVID, we would have to leave our houses 8 hours a day to go and pay for these houses that at the most what we do is we sleep in them at night so that we can get up the next morning and go pay our death pledge down a little bit further. And most of the people that come through our programs don't even love their jobs. They don't have a vocation. And so what if we got rid of these mortgages? What if we got rid of these chains and these shackles, and we actually lived in houses that we wanted to live, that were not going to indebt us for 30 years, a third of our life? And our houses and our gardens and our properties actually improved our well-being. What would that look like? And that was the vision that David Holmgren and Bill Mollison came up with when they wrote Permaculture 1. And that's what we're going to teach you in this class. We are going to take everything that you know about the world, we're going to strip it out of your mind, we're going to reorganize it in a way that allows you to look at the world through a completely different set of lenses. And when you come out, you will only see solutions. And you will see the path ahead of you for the next 20 or 30 years. You'll see all the projects that you have to do, and you will be excited about it. You will have a zest for life again. And that is resoundingly what all of our students have said when they come out of these PDCs. We've had over 1,000 students come through our programs. I want to teach another 9,000 before I die, which means that I've got to step it up. And then I want a whole bunch of those to go out and start teaching as well. That's how we change the world. One person at a time. So if you're interested in being part of that, if you're interested in joining us on this program and starting to change the world, starting right outside your back door, I'm going to leave a link to our online course in the chat window there. The course registration is open till Sunday night at midnight. It's 50% off of what it usually is when it's live and in person. We have more teachers, 100 hours of content, all recorded, and we're tailoring the content to you. We're going to answer your questions in real time as you go through this crisis, so that you can stop feeling anxiety and start working towards the future that you know you want. Thanks so much, guys, for participating in tonight's live stream. I look forward to seeing you guys in future live streams. And I hope you have an incredible holiday season. I hope that you spend time with loved ones and start trying to think about what this ridiculous term that we're being fed right now, the new normal, means to you. So what is your new normal going to be? How are you going to define your new normal and take control of your life in 2021? Okay, guys. See you all really soon. Stay safe and have a wonderful holiday. And I hope to see a whole bunch of you